Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Gittin. This is our 11th class. We have, I think, 2 more classes till the end of the Masechet. Today we are going to be reviewing Daf 72 to 78. Okay, we're going to start at the Mishnah on Daf 72. We're going to talk today about conditions that were set at the time of the giving of the get. This is called a stipulation. In Hebrew, it's called a t'nai. One can make a t'nai, one can make a stipulation, and we'll see what the extent of those stipulations are. So the Mishnah tells us on Daf 72, if the husband says, this is your get if I die, or he says, if I die from this illness, so then it is invalid. The reason it's invalid is the stipulation seems to be saying when he dies, it goes into effect. Now, you cannot get divorced from someone who is dead. Therefore, it doesn't work, right? She would be a widow. She would not be a divorcee. If he says, again, for the rest of this class, for the next hour, every statement is going to be, this is your get if. So I'm just going to go from the if, but this is your get from today if I die. Okay, now that's valid. Meaning what happens is when he dies, or if he dies, it retroactively is going to be going to go into effect from the day that he wrote it or gave it, right? From today, in Hebrew, it's me'achshav, if, right, or when I die. If he says from today and after I die, now it's a little bit more complicated because again, here the Gemara says we have a doubt. Is it, right, did he mean to say from today or did he mean to say after I die, right? Today works, after I die doesn't work. And here the Gemara says, what does it mean, a safek? Safek means doubt. So you can't be like half divorced. So what does it mean? It actually means she's half divorced, meaning we're not sure. Therefore, let's say they didn't have children. She would need to do chalitza, but she couldn't do yibum, right? This is bringing us back to Masechet Yevamot. If you remember, we learned if you're fully married, you can do yibum, right? If not, you can decide if you want to do chalitza or yibum. If we're not sure if you were married, you're going to do chalitza, but you cannot do yibum. So that's the case here. Let's say he says, this is your get today. If I die from this disease, right? Let's say he's very sick. And then let's say he recovers and then he dies. So what happened, right? If he died from the original illness, so then the get is valid. If not, right, let's say he recovered and died from something else, so then it's not valid, right? Meaning he based it on recovering or dying from that illness. If that is not what killed him, so then the get is not valid. Okay, that was the Mishnah. Let's go to the Gemara. So the Gemara explains, right, when we said, if I die, right, only that, this is your get if I die. So that seems to be, again, from our Mishnah, that seems to say after I died. Remember we said, if he said, if I die, we said it was invalid. So that would mean that if I die means after I'm dead, right, which means it doesn't work. Or the Gemara says, well, maybe it could mean before I die, and then it would be valid. Let's say, again, remember we said, this is your get from today when I die. So therefore, from today means now, and therefore it's valid before he died, and therefore it works. Rabbi Yossi says we look at the date of the get. And it doesn't matter if the husband said from today, Either way, it works retroactively, and therefore it would be valid. Rav Huna wasn't sure about the reasoning of Rabbi Yossi, and therefore he said, you need to do chalitza because I'm not really sure if she's really divorced. Let's say he says, this is your get if I don't come back in 12 months. Right, again, don't forget in those days, travel is very dangerous, and he doesn't want her to have to do yibum. So he says, look, I'm going on a dangerous trip. If I don't come back in a year, so then we're divorced. Okay, so it says 12 months. Let's say he died within those 12 months, so the get doesn't work because the get only goes into effect at the end of the 12 months. At the end of the 12 months, he's no longer with us, therefore he cannot divorce her. So it doesn't work. So it can't work retroactively. Rava says, let's say he said, this is your get if I die. He says that does work because he wants it to work retroactively, right? Really what he meant to say is right before I die, even though he said when I die. Okay. Let's say we were talking about if the person was sick. So as we said, if he recovers, so then the get isn't valid. And let's say a person gives a gift, right? And they say, this is your gift if I die from this illness. If he recovers, it's not a gift, right? Because he didn't die. Let's say he went from one illness to another without recovering in between. So the Gemara says that the get is valid because he did die of an illness, even though it wasn't this illness. Daf 73 tells us, let's say a person is on his deathbed. This is called a shchiv mira. This means someone is imminently about to die. As we've seen previously, there are specific laws about this case, that a shchiv mira, like a person who's on their deathbed, we take their word, very seriously. So let's say he gives a gift and goes from one sickness to another, and then he dies. So then that is valid. Let's say he says, this is your get if I die from this illness, and then the house falls on him and he dies from that, or he's bitten by a snake. It's not valid because he didn't die from the illness. Remember, this makes sense after we've learned Masechet Nedarim, right? We were very careful about taking people's words at face value, and so too here with the get. Let's say he says, it's your get if I don't get up from this illness, right? If I don't recover or if I don't survive, then any of those other cases, the get would still be valid because he died. It didn't say how he was going to die, but he died. Or maybe it doesn't work. And the Gemara actually talks about if a lion ate him. It's interesting because it reminds us of a time that there were actually lions in Israel. So it seems that, right, lions, snakes, so that's very, I wouldn't use the word common, but was a possibility. Let's put it that way. Let's say a person took responsibility to pay for land if anything happened to it, right? Like a guarantee. Does it include anything? So because we were talking about, right, the person says if I don't recover, but let's say they're bitten by a snake, eaten by a lion. Here the Gemara actually talks about, right, either what we would call like acts of God, right? If anybody's an insurance salesman, right? What does insurance cover, right? So do acts of God count, right? So here it's not called acts of God. Here it's called uncommon things, right? If I say, this is your land, right? We did a sale, you bought the land, and I say, look, I'll reimburse you if there are any problems. When I said problems, I meant, I don't know, there was a pit there, or, right, there's something that I could reasonably have thought of or anticipated, right? But let's say the government comes and diverted the river through your property, right? I didn't know that the government was going to do that. Right, am I responsible for it? And the Gemara discusses, right, if it's not something that's common, you're not responsible for it. So too with the illness and the snakes and the lions. Okay, next Mishnah, Daf 73. Let's say he says, again, this is your get from today when I die. So now, is she divorced? Let's say he's still alive. Is she divorced? Is she not divorced? We used the word today, but we used when he dies. What's her status? So the Mishnah says she cannot sleep with him from today because retroactively she's going to be divorced from that day. Therefore, she always needs somebody to see that they're not alone together, because we want to make sure that they are not together. Let's say he says from the time um, I'm in this world, meaning again, like right before I die, right? Does that mean right from the moment before he dies? And therefore, she's still married till then, or she's married or not married because he could die at any moment. Like, I don't know what's going to happen in 1 minute. So maybe this minute she's already divorced. Okay, so now the Gemara explains. If they were, so the case we said before, from today, when I die, we say they're not allowed to be together. This, we haven't really learned it, but if he, if there's we'll see it maybe towards the end of today or maybe next week. As soon as he says he's going to divorce her, right, once he gives her the get, they're divorced. Till then, if he let's say he writes the get and he means to divorce her, and then he sleeps with her, he's actually, I guess it depends exactly what he says, but it is possible that he's going to negate the get, right? If you're going to divorce someone, you can't be with them. So that's the case here, right? If he says from today, when I die, so from today means today. And therefore, if they were seen alone at night, do we suspect them? Do we not suspect them? So the Gemara says, no, we don't suspect that they were together, because if they were together, again, as we mentioned, the get would be invalid, and we know he wants to give her the get, so therefore they wouldn't have been together. Let's say he gave her money after they were together. That shows that they didn't have, maybe he paid for services. So that would not invalidate the get. But the Gemara says, no, maybe the money was just a gift and we don't know. Okay, next case. Let's say the man divorced his wife and then they were seen together. Again, it's problematic. So Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel argue if she needs another get, right? Why were they together? So it actually depends if they were seen having relations, and then that's obviously more serious. But our Braita doesn't say anything about money here, so that's not really the case. Okay, right, but if they didn't see them having relations, they don't need a second get, or maybe they do, depending on whose opinion. Let's say he says the moment before I die, so then it has to be that, right, again, the moment before he dies, so he had to die, and then they would be divorced. But let's say he didn't die. So then they were considered married the whole time. Right, because again, he doesn't say today. He says from the moment right before I die. That only comes into effect when he dies. If he doesn't, they're married the whole time. Okay, Daf 74, page 74. Again, right, but when he dies, she doesn't need a new get, right? That works. Again, the husband supports her the whole time that they were together, because again, we said that they're considered married the whole time. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, next Mishnah on Daf 74. Let's say he says, this is your get if you give me 200 zuz, right, which is the currency at the time of the Mishnah. Right, so we've heard about this before. We've definitely heard about this today, right? He says, if you give me money, I'll give you the get. This is valid. He could say this, and she needs to pay it. Let's say he says, if you give me 200 zuz in 30 days, right? You have like a time limit in 30 days. If she pays within 30 days, it's valid. If not, then not. We'll see why this is important to say. Let's say he says, if you give me my cloak, right? I had a very fancy fur coat in the closet. If you give me my fancy cloak, then I'll give you the get. And now let's say it's lost and she can't find it. So the Mishnah says, there's an opinion that says she can pay the value of the cloak and then they're divorced. Okay, now the Gemara tells us that we said in the beginning, this is your get if you give me 200 zuz. So there's a machloket. What's the machloket? Is it that at that moment that he says it, they're divorced, and then she has to pay 200 zuz, or does she have to pay 200 zuz and then she's divorced, right? How do we understand the stipulation, right? So what goes into effect when? Right? And then, like let's say the get was lost before she paid the money. So was it valid? Are they already divorced or not? Right? That's what's called the nafkamina. That's the practical application, right? Let's say, right, again, not everyone has a safe, or right, let's say he gets lost before she pays the 200 zuz. Is she divorced or not? So that's a machloket. The Gemara tells us, and this is a spoiler for the next Masechet, which is Kiddushin, that the same is with Kiddushin, right? Meaning a man says, and this is actually the opposite, right? The man says, I'll give you 200 zuz if you will be betrothed to me, right? So hare at mikudeshet li, right? You should be betrothed to me if I give you 200 zuz. So you see how this is opposite, but it's the same thing. Again, it's a machloket when it's valid, right? Did she, let's say he says, you are mikudeshet to me if I give you 200 zuz. And then let's say he doesn't give the money right away, and another guy comes and says, I want you to be my wife. Right? Can she accept the second proposal, or is she already engaged to the first guy? Again, I'm using the word engaged, but if you remember, Kiddushin is very serious, meaning you don't just break off Kiddushin, you actually have to get divorced, meaning it's a very serious thing. It's not a regular engagement, but we'll talk more about that in a few weeks. Okay, so the Gemara tells us we need to understand that it's both cases for the get and for Kiddushin, because on one hand they're similar, but we could also think that they're different, right? When he's trying to bring her closer, so then we understand that, maybe there's one situation, but if he's trying to push her away, right, to get divorced, maybe it's different, right? So they're different. So the Gemara says, no. The machloket is the same in both things. Let's say he says, if you give me 200 zuz, right? This is your get if you give me 200 zuz, and then he dies. So now what happens, right? So again, if we say she's already divorced from the second he gave her the get, or from the second he made that statement, so then she would be divorced. But now, can she pay the inheritors, right? The heirs. Is that as if she paid him or not? And that's a machloket. Some say that's it, she's messed up, she can't pay. Others say she just pays the heirs and she is divorced. Again, one would ask, why is this important? He's dead, right? They're separate anyway, right? She's a widow. The difference is if there are no children, then they would have to do yibum or chalitza if they were still married. If they were divorced, she wouldn't. So that's important to understand. Okay, now the Gemara asks a question that, let's say when you make a condition, the word in Hebrew is al minat, right? So that, right, this is your get if, in Hebrew we say if, but al minat, right? if you do this. So the question is almanat, is it conditional? Remember, as we said, this is your get if you pay me 200. Does it mean when you pay me 200, this is your get? Or does it mean this is your get now, and you have to pay me 200 zuz, right? That's what we're discussing, right? When I make a stipulation, is it only when you fulfill that stipulation, does it go into effect or not? It seems that everybody agrees that when you make this stipulation almanat, like if, that it actually means from now, and therefore she would be divorced from now. And of course, later she needs to pay, but that's what it means. There's a machloket only about if he says from today and when I die. Remember, we had that case. That one is a little bit complicated because what do you mean from today and when I die? That seems to be contradictory. Do we see it as a safek, as a doubt, or do we see it as valid? Okay, let's say he says, again, within 30 days, give me 200 zuz. So then, now again, it's interesting how the order, right? Then it seems that if he says, here is your get within 30 days, if you give me 200 zuz, she has to fulfill the condition, and then she will be divorced. Okay, right? And now we're going to go to the case of the cloak. Remember when he said, I need you to give me back my cloak, then you'll be divorced. Maybe he actually really wanted that cloak and the money isn't valid. Remember we said the opinion in the Mishnah was as long as he pays, as long as she pays the value, so then it works. Another opinion is no, he wanted that cloak, and if he doesn't get it, it's not valid. Again, now a new case. Let's say he says, again, this is your get if you pay me 200 zuz. And then he says, you know what? Never mind, right? Never mind. So the Gemara discusses what happens now, right? Maybe she doesn't need to pay it, right? He said, never mind, right? We call it mechila. He waived the condition. Or maybe it's not valid because he made a certain stipulation. If she doesn't pay, so then there is no get, right? So again, maybe the get is only there if she pays. Maybe he's just trying to torture her and or kind of make things more complicated, and therefore they are not divorced. Again, now the Gemara discusses, can a person nullify their condition in a vow, right? As I mentioned, Masechet Nedarim, right? So if you make a vow, there's a discussion in the Masechet, if you remember, if I could say, you know what, never mind, I forget that condition and let's forget it. Okay. Okay, now the Gemara teaches us that, hold on one second. Okay, let's go to the next, 1 minute. The Gemara talks about if she gives him money against his will, right? Again, let's say he wanted the cloak and she wants to pay the value. Or let's say he said, give me money, never mind. And she says, no, I want to pay. The question is, if she pays against his will, is the get valid or not? Okay, and of course, it's a machloket. Some say yes and some say no. Okay, Daf 75. Let's say he says, this is your get, but the paper is mine. I really like the paper it was written on. I want to keep it. This is invalid because we haven't learned yet. But when the husband writes the get, it needs to sever all ties with her, and she needs to own the get. Right? If you say, here's your get, but I own the paper, that doesn't work. However, if he says, here is your get, but I want you to return the paper to me afterwards, right? Right? This is your get if you return the paper to me, so then it's valid. right? Because in that first moment, she owned it, and now she's returning it. She doesn't have to keep it, but she does need to own it at that point. Okay. From here, the Gemara discusses again, as we mentioned, today's topic is conditions, what's called a t'nai in Hebrew. And the Gemara teaches us here, and we have seen it before, that when you're making an official condition, an official t'nai, it actually needs to be said double, right? What's called a t'nai kaful, a double condition. What does that mean? If you do this, then X. If you don't do this, then Y, right? Or not X, however you want to say it, right? If you pay me 200 zuz, this is your get. If you don't, then this is not your get, right? You can't have it, right? We actually learned this from Reuven and Gad, right? The two tribes that asked to be on the other side of the Jordan. We actually have mentioned this before, but it was a few weeks ago in the Parsha, where we read, right, we learned this idea of a condition, right? They say, right, we will get this land if we go in, right, and fight for our brethren, and if we don't fight for them, we won't get this land. And that's really where we learn the Masechet. That's where we learn the idea of a t'nai, a stipulation, a condition. So maybe the Gemara says the cases that we mentioned before, maybe they don't work because he didn't make a double t'nai, a double condition. So the Gemara says that, again, let's say you have a get of someone who's on his deathbed, and he says, if I don't die, this isn't a get, right? If I die, it is a get, right? So that's the language that you have to use for the double, right? The double condition. Again, as I mentioned, Reuven and Gad, that's exactly what they said. Okay, next Mishnah on Daf 75. The husband says, this is your get if you serve my father or nurse my son. So now, what does that mean? She needs to nurse the son for 2 years or maybe 18 months. Let's say the father or the son die, so then the get goes into effect. Let's say he says you have to serve my father for 2 years, meaning specifically he says the number of years, or nurse the child for 2 years. If the son dies or the father says, I don't want you to serve me, so then it's not valid because he gave a 2-year kind of window, and since it didn't work, the get is invalid. Or another opinion in the Mishnah is that it is valid. Okay. The Gemara explains what is this about, right? Maybe you just have to serve the father or nurse the child for 1 day. Maybe that's enough, and not a long period of time. So this is a machloket, right? If he doesn't specify any time, maybe it means 2 years, maybe it means 1 day. Daf 76, right? Some say that because he didn't make a double condition, so then it doesn't work. Others say, no. Again, it does work. Right, the Gemara says that in the Torah, the conditions are always double, but maybe we don't need a double condition for our lives, right? For vows or conditions in our life. Or maybe just like in the Torah, it's double, we also need it to be double. Now the Gemara teaches us that if the condition isn't fulfilled, but it's not her fault, right? Let's say the child died, the father died, it's not her fault. So then the get is valid, right? It goes into effect. She tries, she was ready, she can't do it. Okay, she's divorced now. Let's say he says in front of witnesses, this is your get if you serve my father. And then in front of other witnesses, he says, this is your get if you pay me 200 zuz, right? Sneaky guy. So now what happens? So the Gemara says she can decide which one she wants to do, right? Meaning he gave two separate stipulations. It can't be that it's both. Therefore, she can choose one of them. Let's say he says, that like the same case of the two witnesses, but he says, give me 200 zuz. And then to the other group, he says 300 zuz. Now we see that he actually changed his mind and she needs to give 300 zuz, right? He uprooted the first condition. Okay, next Mishnah. This is your get if I don't come back in 30 days. Again, he's going on a trip. Here, the Mishnah talks about him going from the two regions of Israel, right? Israel is divided into two at this point in history. There's Yehuda, Judea in the south being like Jerusalem and south, and there's the Galilee, the Galil, which is up north, right? So let's say he's going. He says, right? Let's say they live in Yehuda. He says, "This is your get. If I don't come back in 30 days," and he goes to the Galil, right? And the idea is that he's again on a business trip and he's scared he's not going to make it back. So if he doesn't make it back, so then she gets the get after 30 days. Let's say, so now the Mishnah says, if he got to the city of Antipares, so then, and here the Mishnah says that it's the first city in the Galil. Remember, he's going from Judea, he's going up north. If he gets to that first city in the Galil, and let's say he says, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. I forgot my, I don't know, fill in the blank, something important, right? I forgot all the paperwork. And now he goes back home. So he went where he said he wanted to go. He came back within 30 days. So now, even if he goes back and he doesn't come back after 30 days, the get is not valid because he did return. He went to the Galil, even though he didn't go where he wanted to go, but he went to the Galil and he came back. That's the end of the get. The same case from the reverse. Let's say they lived in the Galil and he was going to Yehuda. If he got to Kfar Otnai, then again the same idea. It becomes invalid. And I'll just send you, my friend Shuli Mishkin wrote a great article on these two cities. Oh no, she wrote an article on two other cities, which we'll get to in a minute. But I still suggest that you read it on the Hadran website. It was excellent. But speaking of cities, but we'll get to those cities in a minute. Let's say he says, right, this is your get. If I don't come back from going overseas, if he got to Akko, which seems to be the first city in outside of Israel, which is not necessarily the case. We'll see in a minute. Again, it invalidates the get. This is your get as long as I don't see your face in 30 days. So then, as long as he isn't alone with her, right, it seems that that's like euphemistic for being together. As long as they're not together, having relations, so then the get is valid. Okay, so now the Gemara says that maybe those two cities that I mentioned, again, we said that they're the first city in the next region. Maybe they're the last city in his region. And again, the reason it works is because it's like a double condition. Now the Gemara asks, wait a minute, Akko, which is acre, right? So wait a minute, isn't that Israel? So the Gemara says, correct, it's not outside of Israel, it is Israel. And again, right, if Akko isn't outside of Israel, but if I was away for less than 30 days, so then it's invalid. And the wife is believed to say that he didn't come back and that they didn't have relations, and therefore the get is valid. Next Mishnah. When we get towards the end of a Masachet, the Mishnayot come faster. So the next Mishnah says, this is your get if I don't come back in 12 months, and then he died, right? Remember we said this, it is invalid because he didn't say from now. If he would have said, from now, if I don't come back, so then it would work. Let's say he tells people, if I don't come back in 12 months, write and give a get to my wife. And let's say they write it within the 12 months, and then they give it after the 12 months, it's invalid, right? Because he meant write and give it after 12 months. Let's say he says, write and give the get if I don't come back in 12 months, right? So if they write it before and give it after, right? Again, it's invalid, or maybe it is valid. Let's say, right, again, they wrote it and he gave it after 12 months and he died. If she got the get before he died, it's valid. If he died first, it is invalid. And if we don't know, again, it's safek, we're not sure, and she would maybe need another get. Now the Gemara explains that she could get remarried because the date on the get is from now. Remember we said, almenat, right, on the condition that also means, right, from now and, right, when whatever stipulation happens. Right, let's say, right, does she need to wait the 12 months, right? Let's say he died. Does she wait, can she be divorced right away? Or does she have to wait the actual 12 months? Let's say he says, this is your get, and it'll be your get in the morning, right? Right, when the sun comes up. Let's say he dies at night, so the get is invalid because it was only going to be valid in the morning. This is your get on condition that the sun rises, right? Al t'nai. Remember we said al t'nai means from now. So then if he dies in the middle of the night, it is valid. Let's say he says, this is your get if it rises. So now we're not sure if it's valid or not. Okay, Daf 77. The fact that the husband says, write and give if, right? So the question is, where do you put the comma? Is it that he said, write and give it after 12 months? Or did he say, write it, comma, and give it after 12 months, right? That's the machloket, where you put the comma. Let's say he says, this is your get if I don't return after a full Shemitah cycle, right, which is 7 years. We actually give him, right, after Shemitah could also mean the year after Shemitah. So we have to wait the whole year after Shemitah. Let's say he says, if I don't return in a year, we wait till after a year. So then we give him a month, right, because that whole month is after the year. Let's say he says after this month, we give him a week into the next month. What about after this week, right? If I say I'll do it next week, what does that mean? So the Gemara says you have Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, right? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday is called, right, after Shabbat. But Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is called before Shabbat. So that's an interesting way that they already like split up the week and what that means. Let's say you say after the holiday. That's a very famous concept in Israel. We say in the fall, right? I'll do it after the Chagim, right? After the Chagim, that's when I'm going to, fill in the blank, be extremely productive, right? So what does that mean after the Chagim? The Gemara says you have a whole month after the Chagim to kind of get yourself in order, and then you need to buckle down. Okay, that is the end of the 7th chapter. And now we're going to begin a new topic with the 8th chapter on Daf 77. Okay, the Mishnah tells us, so wait, let's take a step back. The Torah tells us that the husband needs to give the wife the get in her hand. V'natan biyada. He needs to give it to her in her hand. So now we're going to interpret what does that mean in her hand, and we're going to see it needs to be in the wife's property. Okay, so now we're going to learn a very famous concept that the husband can actually throw the get We'll see where in a minute. Just so you should understand, none of these things apply nowadays. This is all in the assumption that a man can divorce his wife against her will. Nowadays, that is not the case. And right, the rabbis made a decree that not only can he not do it against her will, but it must be placed directly in her hand, and it cannot be thrown and all these other things. So even though that's the topic of the next chapter, and it's a fascinating topic, nowadays it is not practical because we say it must be placed in her hand. Okay, but let's discuss the fun idea. We are going to be recalling some other masechtot that we have already learned, which is a nice review. We're going to be talking about different domains. If you remember, we did it in Shabbat and we did it in Eruvin. We're going to talk about the public domain, the private domain, his domain, her domain, right? What is hers? What is his? Okay, so now here we go. If the husband throws the get into her house or into her courtyard, it's a valid get and they are divorced. If the husband throws it into his own house or his courtyard, that doesn't work because the get needs to go into her property. If it lands in her lap or in her kalta, which is like a basket, so then it is valid, right? It's going again into her, we'll call it her airspace, her, right? We'll see her dalid amot, which we usually say, her 4 cubits, right? Her airspace, and then it becomes hers. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain, right? The Torah says, "V'natan biyada." He has to put it in her hand. The Gemara says not only can he put it in her hand, but he can put it anywhere that is hers. So too with theft, if someone steals something, it doesn't have to necessarily be in your hand. It could be somewhere in your possession, and then it would work. So now we're going to discuss what is her property. How does she have property? If you remember, anything that she inherits, buys, automatically becomes her husband's. So how does she have property? It could be that the husband said that he doesn't have any claim on it, and therefore it would be her property. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, if you have to put it in her hand, doesn't he own her hands? Meaning, remember we said anything she picks up, anything she makes, it becomes his already. So how would that even work directly, like with her hands? So the Gemara says it comes, but he doesn't really own her hand, in case you are concerned about that. And the Gemara says it happens simultaneously, right? At the moment that she gets the get, her hand becomes hers, right? So she's divorced so that it's hers, so that she can get divorced, right? So somehow it becomes automatic. And the same thing with her property, right? If he throws it into her property, as soon as it lands, or we'll see, she's divorced and the property becomes hers. And of course, as we said, her hands, right? He owns the things that she does or acquires, but not her hands. The same thing with a slave, right? You free a slave by giving him a get shichrur, a document of emancipation. He acquires his own hands at the moment that he gets the document. Okay, now we have a story of a man who's on his deathbed and he writes a get for his wife, but he didn't give it to her before Shabbos. And now it's Shabbos and they see he's about to die. And again, he doesn't want her to be a widow. So Rava tells him, transfer the area that the get is sitting in. Let's say the get is in the living room. So transfer the living room to your wife and have her come and like close the door and lock it. That shows that she owns the living room, and now she is divorced. Now, it's just important to understand, he cannot give her the get on Shabbat. You're not allowed to get divorced on Shabbat. You also cannot acquire property on Shabbat. So it's interesting that Rava says, through this closing of a door, right, you're allowed to close a door on Shabbat. So because she closes the door and locked it, now she takes possession of the get. This seems to be a leniency, and therefore she is divorced. When we said that he can throw the get into her house, she does not have to be home, right? It's actually a machloket. Maybe she does have to be home or near the house. Others say she could be, far away. And here actually is where the Gemara talks about you can throw it if her house is in Tiberia and she's in Sipori, or if the house is in Sipori and she's in Tiberia, it's valid. And that's what Shuli wrote about. So now you can go see that. Okay, right. And everyone agrees that the courtyard is an extension of her hand. Just like he needs to put the get in her hand, he needs to put the get in her chatzer. It's like he's putting it in her hand. Okay, let's say the husband, he doesn't have good luck. He throws the get and into her courtyard, but it lands on, let's say, a wooden pole or beam or wooden something that's in the middle of the chatzer, of the courtyard. If it's 4 amot by 4 amot, so then it's its own domain, and it's not valid because it never landed in her courtyard. If it's smaller than that, so then it's seen as part of the courtyard and it's valid. Okay. Daf 78. The Gemara tells us that let's say she owns her own bed in his house and it's higher than 10 tefachim. If he throws it there, it's valid, right? Again, it's her own property, even though it's in his property. We said that if he throws it like in the basket that she's like wearing, that works. Because it's seen as hers. Okay, next Mishnah. Let's say the husband tells her, take this bill of debt that I have, right? Oh, I owe so-and-so money. Here, take this. And he gives her a piece of paper. And then he's like, haha, it's a get. Just kidding, right? Or she opens it and she sees that it's a get. That's invalid till he says, here is your get, right? He has to be specific. If he gives it to her when she's sleeping, right? He left it by her night table. So well, I don't know if that, whatever. He gives it to her when she's sleeping. He puts it somewhere. That's invalid, right? She couldn't accept it. So now the Gemara explains, it can't be that she finds it on the floor. That's invalid because he has to actually give it to her. So let's say he has it like tucked into his, pocket. And he says to her, okay, you can take it. So then that's valid because she's taking it. Or no, maybe he actually needs to physically give it to her. Right? If he says, this is your get when she wakes up, so then it's valid, right? So it seems it doesn't necessarily have to be at the time that he gave it, but he still must say that it's a get. Or maybe he has to take it back and then give it to her when he says, this is your get. If he puts it in the hand of her slave while the slave is asleep and guarded, so then it's valid. Now, the Gemara is going to explain, remember we said, her hand, he has to put in her hand. Okay, her courtyard is like her hand. What does that mean? It's her property and it's guarded, right? Meaning it's enclosed. So now we're going to expand on something that's guarded and hers. How far does that extend, right? So she is a slave, that's hers, but is he guarded? Like, does she have full control over him? So some say if he's asleep, so he can't move, so then it's valid. But if he was awake, so then he can walk around, so that doesn't work. But, right, let's say, some say that actually the slave needs to be asleep and tied up, meaning he really cannot move. Then he's like a courtyard, and then he can acquire it for her. Okay, next Mishnah, last Mishnah for today. If they're in the public domain, right, Reshut Harabim, and he throws it to her. If it lands close to her, we'll explain what this means, but if it lands close to her, she's divorced. If it lands close to him, she's not divorced. If it lands in the middle, so she is divorced and not divorced. Remember that like middle case. The same thing with kiddushin, right? Harei at mikudeshet li, and he throws the ring at her. Again, depends where it lands. Please do not do this, but depends where it lands. Oh, and the same thing for paying back a loan, right? If I owe you money and I'm like, here's the $100 I owe you, and I throw it at you. Again, please don't do that. So then again, here the Gemara says if it lands in the middle, you split the money. And the Gemara is going to explain this. So what does it mean? Close. It means within 4 amot of the person, right? Every person has dalid amot. That becomes, right, 4 hand cubits. Is that a thing? Or hand breadths? I don't remember. But okay, yeah. Okay, right, exactly. So 4 amot is your personal space. So if it lands within 4 amot of her, then it's hers, and if not, then it's his. What's the middle? Let's say it's like exactly 4 amot from both of them, right? So they're exactly 8 amot apart, or maybe there are 2 sets of witnesses, and one says, no, it was closer to him, and the other one says, no, it's closer to her. Right, so maybe that's what it means. Maybe close means closer, right? Meaning not within 4 amot, but we just look, is it closer to her or closer to him? Or maybe close means something that he could grab easily, or something that she could grab easily, but not necessarily closer, right? Because the Gemara says, right, let's say it is closer to her, but there's a river between them, right? And she cannot get there. So then it doesn't matter that it's close to her, right? She can't get there, right? And vice versa, right? Maybe what's the middle? Either both of them can get there or neither of them can get there. Let's say it landed closer to her, but a dog took it away. So then it's invalid because she never got it. Or no, right? If she can guard it from the dog, so then it's valid, and if not, then no. And again, as I mentioned before, the Gemara says in practice, he actually needs to put it in her hand. As we said, Kiddushin is similar to Gittin in a lot of ways. We'll see more in the next Masechet. The same thing with a debt. Again, you like return the money by throwing it. Let's say the husband gives her the get, but he's holding on, right? He takes the get and he ties a string around it and he gives it to her. And he's holding on to the string, right? So if he can pull the string and the get will come back to him, so then the get is invalid. But if not, then it's valid. As I said, he needs to sever his relationship with her. And if he doesn't, right, if he literally can still control the get, it does not work. Let's say he threw it to her and her hand, right, was, instead of being flat, it's like sloped down, right? So he throws it and it like maybe touches her hand and then it rolls to the floor. So then it's invalid because it never was in, like, she didn't like acquire it, right? As long as it didn't land with 4 amot next to her, so then it doesn't work. And then, right, let's say, it like rolls off and it goes into a river or into the fire. So then it does not count, and she is not divorced. Next week, we're going to talk more about airspace and different other types of faulty gets. Let me see, I saw there was a question here. Hold on. So Lynn is asking about divorce in general. I think that, I can't say. I think it's very interesting that already in the Torah, there's a mechanism for divorce. I think it's very important that Judaism recognizes that maybe one would say not everyone was meant to stay together, as opposed to in other religions where there is no concept of divorce. I don't think that we would say that it is preferable or, celebrated, but I definitely think that the fact that there's already a mechanism in the Torah, I think is very important. I think in general for Masechet Gittin, I think that that's something that's meant to inspire us to work on our marriages. And you're right that I think that there's always an effect on the children. But I think that we did really hear some terrible stories in our Gemara, and therefore I think that when it is necessary, I'm happy that there is a mechanism. We have a few more minutes if anybody wants to ask any questions, but we will meet next week, regular time, regular day, hoping to try to keep that consistent. So I'm just going to stop the recording, wishing everyone a wonderful week, and I can open it up to questions.
Okay.